Hi, my name is Mackenzie Wood, and today I'm going to be discussing the Black Death, the bubonic plague, and I thought it would be a very interesting topic to research in microbiology, especially in our day and age as we're dealing with our own pandemic with COVID-19. So I've done some research on the Black Death, how it got started, and what the main theories are, the causes, the symptoms, and so on and so forth. So let's jump right in. The Black Death occurred between 1346 and 1353. However, there have been recent discoveries that indicate that it could have occurred as early as the 1330s, and some estimates even earlier. The Black Death, the bubonic plague pandemic, took place in the Western Eurasia and North Africa areas of our world and has been considered the most deadly pandemic in our history. Due to census capabilities back then, we are unsure of the exact ballpark even number of people who died due to this pandemic, but it is estimated to be between 75 and 200 million people. The mass amount of deaths, the abnormally high mortality rate, even caused the necessity for mass burial sites where bodies were found in groups of several hundred and even several thousand. A lot of human life. The Black Death has also been referred to as the Great Mortality, the Pestilence, and the Plague. It is caused by a bacteria called Yersinia pestis, and that bacteria exists in parasitic fleas and several other species in the wild, and also in rats and other rodents in our societies. During an outbreak, this Yersinia pestis can kill all of its immediate hosts and die out, or it can be active in hosts that it doesn't kill, causing a new outbreak years or even decades later, which we have seen. This bacterium has several ways of transmitting and infecting. It can go through rats, carried wherever. It can come from fleas, hidden in grain or even on bodies. It's transmitted by blood and aerosols. The bubonic plague is spread by fleas, but it can also take a secondary form in septicemic plague, which is secondary again to the bubonic plague and goes through breaks in the skin. And it can also be a pneumonic plague, which is spread by person-to-person contact through aerosols, like through air droplets. So there are a lot of ways that this plague spreads. As I read about all of these theories and ideas about the spread of the plague, I was reminded of the early 2020 COVID-19 pandemic conversations that included how it spread, what type of contact can cause spread. Is it air droplets? Can it be on surfaces? So it was definitely interesting to read about the different beliefs about how the bubonic plague was spread, how this bacterium, Yersinia pestis, was spread. The most famous understanding of spread is through rats. However, there have been recent studies that suggest that rats were not the main carriers of the fleas and lice that spread the plague, but rather it was humans. Humans who were carrying their own fleas and ticks on their bodies and their clothing. This was published in a study in January of 2017. as researchers simulated Black Death and its infection, comparing infection rates between rats, airborne transmission, and fleas and ticks on humans. Now, some early theories for the cause of this disease were the Great Pestilence in the Air, which is the miasma theory, which is now obsolete. We know not to be true, that noxious air or bad air, or what they sometimes called night air, was the cause of diseases like cholera or the Black Death or chlamydia. And then, of course, the martyrdom and mercy from God was a Muslim religious theory that assured believers their place in paradise and was a punishment for non-believers, that they would either suffer or die. So those were some early theories, but the most predominant theory was that climate change in Asia caused rats to migrate, spread the disease to places that hadn't been before. This, of course, would have spread it to humans, and therefore creating the large plague. Now, this bacterium was discovered by Alexander Yersin in 1894. He was a colleague of Louis Pasteur. But Paul Louis Simond in 1898 was able to determine the mechanism of transmission. So fleas to rodents, then on to humans. However, some issues that people take with these theories are the lack of dead rats, because you would see a lot of dead rats if this is how it transferred, that there were likely other rodents that helped transfer it, and of course that human lice and fleas seem to have been more likely a transmission unit. Now, transmission, especially in that time, would have had a lot to do with hygiene, and people would have easily spread the disease, not really washing hands, covering faces. However, the length and severity of this plague gave public officials of the time the ability to start considering and testing systems of sanitary control that would combat contagious diseases, like using observation stations or isolating people in hospitals, and using new disinfection procedures. So it was a step in the right direction. But this disease can, again, be transmitted bubonically, from rodent to human, septicemically, with breaks in the skin, and also pneumonically from person to person. And the symptoms that were most noted were buboes, which were bubonic boils that showed up typically under the armpits or near the genitals first, and like upper thighs, as well as acral gangrene. So there was gangrene on the feet and the fingers, and people would typically have fevers, pain and aching of their joints, nausea, vomiting blood closer to death, malaise, just tiredness, as well as like freckle-like rashes and spots that likely came from flea and tick bites. To conclude, we'll kind of talk about what happened with bubonic plague geographically. It started in Central or East Asia, spread to Crimea, and from there spread through fleas and rats as they traveled to different areas of the Mediterranean, Western Europe, North Africa, Europe, and then started to spread from person to person pneumonically. Now, what is very interesting is that this specific bacterium has been around for very, very long. It's been found in the DNA of tooth sockets of human skeletons, confirming that this is the bacteria that caused the epidemic and the pandemic, that caused all that death. But this is the very same plague, the very same bacteria that was found in the DNA of 25 skeletons from 14th century London, that were almost identical to the bacteria that hit Madagascar in 2013. So this plague is still here, still alive, endemic, and comes back. We just have modern ways of fighting it, like insecticides or antibiotics or vaccines that we hope they never become drug resistant to. But yeah, that's all I have for you all on the bubonic plague, the Black Death. And I'm excited to hear your feedback.